Let me let me turn on the laser pointer. That's it. Yeah. Okay, so we will start the session. Welcome all of you to problem solving session number 2 for the course Fundamentals of Semiconductor Devices, being conducted by Professor Digvijay Nath from IISc Bangalore. I am Soham Lakhote, your PMRF TA for this course, and I am currently a fourth year student at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, working under Professor Gaurav Banerjee. And my research area is mostly in the area of analog and RF circuits, right? So now, as usual, so this will be the organization of this session. So it will be divided in the two parts. So in the first part, during the last time I had given you the overview of the entire semiconductor industry, right? So who are the main players, who are the main companies, what is the foundry, how the silicon, that is how we fabricate the semiconductor chips from the sand. So all that overview was given. So today we will touch one more hot topic. It is related to the AI and the semiconductor. So how these two are related with each other, and how AI industry is now facing a massive hardware problem. So we will talk about that problem and we will try to relate it with the content of this course. Okay. After that we will take a short break, and after that we will start our regular problem solving session. Okay. So now just to inform you once again, since many new people may have joined today, so all the recorded sessions will be uploaded on this YouTube channel. And just remind me if I forget to insert this link in the chat box of the meeting link, right? In the chat box of the meeting, then just remind me at the end of the lecture, okay? And here I will upload all the recordings and the lecture notes, whatever I have written, whatever slides I have made, right? So they will be made available in the description section of the same video. So I hope that is clear. Now let's move on to the technical topic, right? So I will assume that most of you will not have any background from the AI and ML, because this semiconductor course generally is taken by second year students, right? So we will just briefly go through the overview of what is AI, machine learning, deep learning, and after that we will see how those neural networks are implemented, and from here on we will just see like why the AI is facing hardware issue and what is the role of the semiconductor industry in solving that problem, right? So now just to give you a brief overview, so what is your AI? AI is nothing but your artificial intelligence, right? So it is nothing but human like intelligence which we want our machine to exhibit, right? We want it to take a decisions like our human, right? So we want our machines to work like that. So your AI is nothing but we want our machines to exhibit our human machine like human like intelligence, and that will be done by the machine only, right? Without any help from the human, right? And what is the ML? It is nothing but an approach to what you can say achieve the artificial intelligence, right? So I want my, let's say I want to differentiate between the cats, dogs. I want to differentiate between 3-4 different car models. So of course we can do that easily, but I want the machine to do the same job, right? So that is what the artificial intelligence is all about. And the way that machine will be able to do that thing, the algorithm with which it will be able to do that thing, ML deals with that all that thing, right? And now there are multiple ways of implementing this ML, right? There are different models, but the very popular model that got famous across all the social media and across all the research community is nothing but your deep learning model, right? So it is nothing but a technique for implementing a machine learning. And how we do that? We do that using the help of the neural networks, right? I will show you what are the neural networks, but this diagram represents the what is this. Artificial intelligence is your top level thing, then the machine learning is just the subset of artificial intelligence, then your deep learning is the subset of the machine learning which do the what we want machine to do using the help of the neural networks, right? So this is just the brief overview. And now coming to this is again a one picture that describes it beautifully. So what I want from my machine to differentiate between the cats and dogs, right? And how it will do that, of course I have to implement a ML model, right? And one of the subsets of the ML is nothing but your deep learning model which uses the neural network. So all these matrix kind of things that you are seeing, right, those are your neural nets. Each output of each of the layer is becoming as an input for the next layer, right? So now all this data, just imagine this image as a 2D matrix. It is gonna feed through all these what you can say all these layers, right? And once it has been fed through all these layers, you will get certain output which will tell you whether the image that you had fed, whether it was a cat or it was a dog, or whether it was nothing cat or dog, it was something else, right? So this is just a one picture that I wanted to show it to you. Now coming to the next thing is how these neural networks are actually implemented. So you can see you have all the nodes over here. It consists of different layers, and each layer has particular amount of nodes, right? And what is the job of each node? Each node's input is connected to output of all the previous layer. For example, these are the output nodes, these are the nodes for the second layer, and now from all over the places, this node is connected to all these inputs, this node is connected to all these inputs. So you will have multiple inputs for a particular node, and now these inputs get weighted. These arrows that you are seeing, right, they contain some weight, right? So what does this mean? This is a summation over here. So this node will do what? It will take this input, it will scale it by w1, it will take this x2, it will scale it by w2, and that's how after scaling it will add everything up, and after that it will pass it through certain function. We will not take care of this as of now, just assume this function is not there. It will just represent as a, what you can say, a weighted sum, right? Weighted sum means w1 x1 plus w2 x2 dot 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 plus wn xn. So this is nothing but, what you can say, a multiply and accumulate operation. Multiply means xi into wi, and accumulate means this summation, right? So it is nothing but your multiply and accumulate operation that this neural network is doing. So this is all the stuff that I wanted to understand, right? And so this is exactly what I am presenting you over here. So what is exactly the mathematical operation of neural network? Just imagine this is a picture of a cat, and I am representing this input as a, what you can say, in form of a vector, right? I told you, right, imagine it as a 2D matrix, right? So this is what I am presenting over here. And now these neural networks, as I told you, these arrows that you are seeing over here, each of them have their weights, right? So now what happens when this input gets multiplied by this matrix, right? Then you will get a particular value. And if you have studied the matrix theory, then you know if you multiply this, what you can say, the 2 cross 1 with not 2 cross 1, 1 cross 2 with a 2 cross 1 matrix, then you will get a 1 cross 1 matrix, right? So similarly you will get just one output value, and now you do it for multiple inputs like that, and that's how you generate your output, right? So now I just wanted you to understand that this neural network is nothing but your multiply and accumulate operation, that is this multiplication of the inputs with the respective weights, and then we are summing it up, right? So this is the operation of your neural network. Now coming to just be with me for 2-3 minutes more. After that you will start getting the link of why we are studying all this stuff. So now what is this von Neumann architecture? So you take any CPU or any GPU that is there in your PC, right? So it is based on this von Neumann architecture. And what does this tell us? Like, see, this is your CPU, it has its control unit and it has its arithmetic and logical unit. ALU is where all your multiplication, accumulation, everything, the summation, shifting, every operation will happen on this ALU, and your memory unit is separate from this CPU, right? So whenever you want to, whenever some data is stored in the memory, you have to access the memory in a particular cycle. You have to fetch this data from the memory, and from then you will get the data into the CPU. Then you perform the operation in the arithmetic logical unit, and then again you whatever value you got, you give it to the output device, or again you store it to the memory. So this is what our von Neumann architecture tells you, and all your CPUs and GPUs that are there in the market, they are based on this architecture, right? So now this is just a representative diagram. Like this slide will tell you exactly what is the difference between CPU and GPU. So this von Neumann architecture that I told you, it was just to understand what is present in this slide, right? So as I told you, there is a control unit, there is a arithmetic logic unit, and there is a separate memory, that is DRAM. This memory is outside of your CPU, proper CPU, right? So now if you look at the CPU, you have the small number of ALUs, and in GPU you have so many number of ALUs that are present over there. So the reason for this is because, see, CPU has to handle all sort of operation. When I am presenting my slides to you right now, when I am recording using the OBS Studio, when I am surfing the internet, when I am doing some modeling on the Excel sheet, when I am running different softwares like MATLAB, LTSpice, right? All this operation has to be handled by this CPU, right? But what is the job of this GPU? This GPU has to do only one job, right? That job is to present, like, to give me a very clear graphics, right? And as I told you, this graphics, you can think of it like a 2D matrices, right? So this GPU, this arithmetic and logical unit of this GPU has been optimized only for handling those matrix operations and for the, what you can say, for the graphics, that is the images, right? Whereas the ALU of the CPU is not only doing that job, right? It has to do a lot of job. So you just cannot make these ALUs only for a specific applications like in the graphics, like gaming or that type of applications, because your CPU has to handle multiple amount of tasks, right? So now, as you can see in the GPU, we have so many ALUs, right? So the moment I take the data from the DRAM, I can feed it to multiple of these ALUs. But in CPU, that is not possible for me, right? And so that's why you can see, because of this such type of architecture, you get such a good graphics when you insert your gaming card, right? When you have a GPU in your attached to your PC, so you get such a good graphics while playing the game, right? It is because of this only, because there are so many ALUs that are doing the operations in the parallel, right? So now this is just the representation, like what is there available in the market, and this is just a representation, or like you can consider that CPU handles the data in the scalar way, that is it will just multiply this with this value, whereas the GPU handles it in a form of a, what you can say, a vector. Vector is nothing but a row or a column of a matrix, right? And whereas there is a something called as the TPU. So TPU is nothing but tensor processing unit. So I won't go into the details of that. If you want to have them, just search this term TPU, then you will be able to get some good answers from the Google, right? So now, so these are just different companies that produce the CPUs, GPUs, and TPUs. So TPUs are recently, like after 2016 or 18, the Google started producing these TPUs, and they use it in their data centers, right? You know, they run a heavy AI, they run a complex artificial intelligence models, right? So they need a lot of parallel processing, and that's the reason that you can see that they have developed their own TPU, because CPU generally won't have that much capability, because the arithmetic logical unit of the CPU is not only designed for handling this matrix operations and multiply and accumulate operation. It has to do a lot of stuff, right? So it makes sense to optimize the arithmetic and logical unit and make it a separate chip, so that you can run your complex AI models much more efficiently on the TPU. So if I am given a power constraint, for example, a power consumption constraint, right? So the amount of what you can say, the amount of complex neural network that I can build on the TPU, I won't be able to build it on the same CPU if using the same power constraint. So that is what I wanted to understand you. Now coming to the main part, this is where you will start getting the links, right? So now let's see how complex these AI models are becoming. So this is a DALL-E 2 AI system. So what it does, you just give a text input to it, and it will generate a hand-drawn kind of images, hand-drawn kind of artistic images, right? So of course this has been trained using a lot of inputs, right? So but I just wanted to understand how many parameters are there. So the parameters that this model contains is around 3.5 billion parameters. Now what does this parameter means? I told you, like, there is a neural network, right? So just a minute. Yeah, there is a neural network and there are weights that are associated. So all these nets that you're seeing, they have their associated weights with them, and these weights are getting multiplied with the inputs. So these weights are nothing but the parameters of that particular model, right? So there are around 3.5 billion parameters, such parameters in this DALL-E complex model, right? And it is this DALL-E model was developed by the OpenAI. Now let's move on to the next thing, that is from the Imagine AI model that was developed by the Google. Again, it do the same job. What it does, it produces the hand-drawn kind of artistic images. You just need to give a text input, right? I want to draw a teddy bear wearing a hat, right? So it will generate what you can say, artistic image that human will be able to generate. So whatever the artist will be able to draw, it will draw a same image in a very close manner, very close compared to what a human being is capable of, right? So it has 4.6 billion parameters. Now if we move on to the what you can say, the GPT-3 from the OpenAI, right? So it has staggering 175 billion parameters, right? So it's too much. I mean, it's more than order of magnitude as compared to what these previous AI models had developed, right? So now the last one is like this the model developed by this Google. It contains of around 1 trillion parameters. Just imagine, it is 1,000 billion parameters, right? So now why am I telling you all this stuff? So we will look where is the issue now. See, these parameters that I'm telling you, these have to be stored somewhere, right? It is not like they will come from the open air, right? So now the way this happens is like, as I already told you, the logic, that is the processor and the memory, they are separate, right? As I told you in the von Neumann architecture, right? So you can see a logic over here, that is your processor, and this is the memory. The memory chip is different from this logic, right? And you can clearly see there is some interface between the DRAM and the logic that is present over here. Now what happens when you want to have these 100 200 billion parameters, right? So what I told you, these neural networks have to do this multiply and accumulate operations, right? They will multiply the inputs with the weight and they will add it for each and every input, and then they will give you the output value, right? Since these parameters are these 100 200 billion parameters, whatever I told you, they are getting stored in this DRAM, that is the off chip memory, right? From there on, like, it has to travel through these buses into the logic. Now inside it you will have what you can say, you will have some on chip memory, but you cannot put a lot of on chip memory, right? Because this it cannot handle that memory, because most of this logic is contained by the processor. It is the most of its size is because of the processing unit, right? The memory is off chip over here, so you can have a large memory over here, but you cannot have a large memory over here. So that is why we have different memory layers, right? Cache memory is there, then your DRAM is there, right? So the cache memory cannot occupy GBs or TBs of space, right? You all know that, right? So now these parameters will come over here, and now these parameters have to travel over here, right? Now let's look what is written over here. So these parameters stored in the memory have to be fetched when we want to do the multiply and accumulate operation, right, for the neural network, and that is what the job of the neural network is, right? Now accessing the memory of chip uses 200 times more energy than a floating point MAC operation. What does this mean? So this means that if I want to perform this multiply and accumulate operation, right, let's say it consumes some amount of energy doing this multiplication, right? See, these weights and this I inputs and W, whatever you are seeing, right? So these are nothing but it will be represented in the form of bits, because CPU doesn't understand anything other than the binary, right? So they will be represented by 8 bit, 16 bit or 32 bit, or even by the 64 bits, right? Now what I am telling you, like, the amount of energy that the processor consumes to do this multiplication, right? Now that energy that I'm consuming to do that multiplication, I'm consuming 200 times more energy just to fetch this parameter from my DRAM, right? So you can clearly see how inefficient this process is, right? I'm consuming 200 times more energy just to access my parameters that are stored in the DRAM compared to the multiplication, that is the processing operation that I'm doing, right? So this is what I want you to understand. And now we will go from here, like, you will start getting all the links. You have your off chip memory, that is the DRAM that I told you. You have your on chip memory, right, in the processor, and you have your processing elements all over here. Now why so many processing elements? As I told you, in the CPU you may not have these many processing elements, but since I want to perform the same operation, multiply accumulate, right? So I can create a multiple parallelization over here. I can take one element and I can create thousands of such elements, right? So, and that's the reason why we have a separate GPU compared to CPU, right? So now just imagine this as a kind of a GPU over here, which does all these operations in a parallel manner. So you have the parameters that are stored in the off chip memory, right? Now they will get into your on chip memory first, right? So you access them, and as I told you, this interface will cause a lot of energy consumption, right? And once you have these parameters in your on chip memory, they will go as an input to your processing elements. So what are the inputs? So it is your weight and it is your input, right? So these are the processing elements which are highlighted by a multiply and accumulate operation over here, right? So each of these processing element will be doing the same operation, and once you have these two inputs ready with you, right, they go into the processing elements. Processing element do this multiply and accumulate operation. It will have the result, and that result that you are seeing, right, it will be fed back into this memory, that is the on chip memory, and from the on chip memory it will again go back to the off chip memory. So let's see how many operations we have done. First we have accessed this memory and we have transferred the data from off chip to on chip memory, right? So it will consume some energy, right? So energy per memory, that is for read and write operation. So I have read from the memory while taking the input, and while whatever result my processing element gave me, I have to again take that result and store back in the off chip storage, right? So that is the write operation, and the read operation is nothing but I'm reading the parameters from the DRAM, right? So this is nothing but the energy per memory per read and write operation, right? And now energy consumed by this processing element itself will consume some energy because it's a multiply and accumulate kind of operation, right? So now what I had told you, this operation, the multiply and addition, it consumes 1 by 200th of the energy of whatever I will do over here. That is fetching the data from memory, then again reading it, storing it, and writing it back to the DRAM, right? So this consumes around 200 times more energy compared to this processing element, right? So now why I told you all this stuff is because I want you to go into the Moore's law now. And because generally, see, everybody tells like number of transistors doubles every 18 months, number of transistor doubles every 18 months, right? But this has generally been true for the processor technologies. So if you look at this graph, so what it tells you, on the x-axis you have the year, and on the y-axis you have the relative performance, right? So what does this mean? If you look over here, as we are progressing ahead in the years, right, the performance of the processors are increasing continuously because you are scaling down your transistors, and on the same amount of area, now you are able to put more number of transistors. The more number of transistors you are able to put on the processor, the more functionality it can do in the same power consumption constraint, right? So I hope this point is clear to you. But now what happened with the memory? See, the memories were scaling initially, but what happened? The performance gap between the processors and the memory, they started to improve, they started to increase a lot, and they have increased to so much of extent. You can clearly see from these dots how far the processor is, advanced processor today is performing compared to the memory. And this year is not even 2020, it's 2010. Now just imagine the situation today. So now you may be asking me why this memory ball bottleneck exists, right? So why there is so much of gap between the processor and memory. So now we will come to that reason now. See, this memory I told you, these are your off-chip memories and these are your DRAM memories, right? So now this is where, so this is the single element of your, what you can say, a 1-bit DRAM cell, right? So whatever bit you want to store, so if you want to store a 1 bit over here, you charge this capacitor, and if you want to store a 0 bit over here, you discharge this capacitor, and this is nothing but your transistors, right? And read and write operations are performed by these bit lines and word lines over here, right? So now why I told you this, because in week 2 lecture, sir must have told you that there is something called as a leakage current that exists in the transistor, and it depends on the intrinsic carrier concentration, right? So now what happened? See, when you design the processor, this you are not intentionally attaching these capacitors, right? This capacitive structure is only for this DRAM, right? When you do the processing kind of operations, this you don't attach this kind of what you can say the capacitor over there. You have your, what you can say, the OR gates, NAND gates, whatever gates are there, you just have the transistor implementation of these gates, right? So now what is happening, when we started to scale down the transistor, right, as you know, we are scaling down the channel length, the what you can say, the feature between the gate, between the source and the drain, whatever is present under the gate, that is nothing but your channel is there, right? So we are shrinking down the channel, right? So that's how we are reducing the transistor size. The moment we start to do it, right, what happens, the leakage current of this transistor started to increase, and when we are moving to advanced process nodes, right, 7 nanometer, 28 nanometer, or even below that, what is happening, this leakage current improved, the leakage current also got increased. And you can clearly see that if I turn off this MOSFET, what I want is it should act like a open circuit, right? It should act like a off switch, right? But the problem is, if it may act like a off switch, but it will still consume some amount of current actually. So if there is a leakage current that is coming from this transistor, then whatever charge that you have stored over here, right, the problem is it will get what you can say, it will, the capacitor will start to discharge, and this information that you are seeing over here, it will get what you can say, it will get destroyed. You won't be able to recover this information. So that's why you may have heard the memories have this periodic refreshing operation, right? They do the periodic refreshing operation because there is a leakage associated with this transistor, and this leakage current will just discharge this capacitor and will destroy the information, right? So that's why you can see we cannot arbitrarily scale down this transistor, right? So these are the issues that I am writing over here, that 0 and 1 bits are stored as a charge on the capacitor. The technology scaling didn't help the DRAM much after some point because of the leakage from the transistor, right? The more smaller you make, the more leakage you will be able to get. And if you are getting more and more leakage, just imagine there is a current source that is present, and if I increase the amplitude of this current source, that means this capacitor will get discharged very fast, right? And that means I have to do a higher amount of refreshing. The refresh rate that I am doing for this DRAM, it has to increase, right? And that's not good, correct? So, and this was because of the leakage of the current of the MOSFET when it's in the off condition, right? So this leakage current increased as the technology achieved higher amount of scaling, and this prevented the DRAM to use the latest available technology node, right? So this was one of the main reasons why the DRAM didn't scale so much as compared to what you can say processors, because I cannot make this transistor arbitrarily small, and the moment I stop the scaling of the transistor, I cannot fit more number of transistors in the same amount of area. For like the process, this process is happening in the case of the processor. The moment you are able to reduce down the channel length, you are able to fit more number of transistors in the same amount of area. But here the constant is there, like you cannot arbitrarily scale down this transistor length, and because of which you are not able to shrink down the memory size. So the only way to get more amount of memory from the DRAM is to put more what you can say is to increase the area. That is, you have to increase the size of this black IC that you are seeing over here to get more and more amount of memory. And you know, in each and every PCB board there is a limited amount of size, right? The size is the what you can say real estate of the PCB board, so you cannot arbitrarily increase the size of this IC, right? So that is the main reason why the DRAMs didn't scale so much, whereas the processors are now moving to 2 nanometer 3 nanometer technology nodes, right? So now this slide will connect everything. So what we discussed, see, there is a MOSFET leakage issue is there in the DRAM, right? And because of which you cannot arbitrarily scale down the transistor length. If you are not able to scale down the size of the transistor in the DRAM, then the DRAM didn't scale up properly, right? Like their areas did not decrease as much compared to the processors. And now DRAM memory cannot be increased arbitrarily because you are not able to scale up the transistors, scale down the transistors properly, right? And because of this, the area issue got created.
Sir,
Yeah,
sir,
yeah, tell me.
I have a doubt.
Yeah.
There's a leakage current in DRAM, right?
There is a leakage current in the DRAM. Huh. There is a leakage current, but yeah, there is a leakage current. But as I told you, that this capacitor is not there. No, see, this capacitor I have intentionally put. This is not the parasitic capacitance of this transistor. This capacitor I have intentionally put so that the moment I have, let's say I am charging this capacitor, I charge this capacitor to a full value, and let's say this MOSFET turns off, right? I want this capacitor to hold this charge continuously, right? Now, we are not doing the charge storing operation of the capacitor. The processor operates in a different way. It has all those logic gates that you study in the digital electronics, right? You study the multiplier, you study the full adder, half adder. Go ahead. See, just tell me, I will just give you one example. Do you know the structure of the half adder and full adder? Yeah, you know that, right? So, do you intentionally put a capacitor over there, like, or you don't put over there? Let's say I want to perform a two. You won't put it, right? You won't put it over there, right? So now what this capacitor I am intentionally putting, this is how the DRAM is designed actually. In the processor, like you have adders and multipliers, like whatever information you have, like the moment you do some multiplication and addition, the immediate output is available, and that output you generally send it back to the memory very quickly, right? Now here, now you that operation is sending back the processor output, is sending back it to the memory, and memory has to hold this value, right? The processor's job is not to hold this value, right? Because it is not made for that purpose. It is made for the arithmetic and logic operations, right? It has to do multiplication, addition, and everything. So this capacitor I am intentionally putting to store the value. This is not there in the processor. Just imagine the case of your half adder and full adder. Yeah, got it, right? So it is so good question. Yeah. Now coming to the point. Yeah, as I told you, DRAM memory can't be increased arbitrarily, and this caused the area issue in increasing the DRAM memory. So the only point you can increase the DRAM memory is like you have to increase the area, because you cannot scale down the transistors in the DRAM, right? Now why does this matter? Because I already told you that DRAM is the place where I am storing the AI models parameters, right? The weights that you saw in the neural networks, right? You saw the weights over there, right? So all those weights, that is 100, 200 billion, 1 trillion model parameters, right? They have to be stored in the off-chip memory, right? And as I told you, like this complex AI model, the complexity has increased in recent years. AI models were not that complex a decade back or something, right? So now, because if I have a what you can say area constraint with me, I have a limited DRAM memory with me, and because of the limited DRAM memory, I cannot store these 100 200 billion parameters that are required by the complex AI models, right? And now if you cannot store it in such a small amount of DRAM memory, then it's very difficult to implement this kind of complex AI models in the mobile phones because of the area issue, right? And because of this, because the DRAMs are not able to scale properly compared to the processor, and there is a lot of energy that is consumed just for fetching the data from the memory. There is a hardware issue that what you can say the AI research community is facing now. They want to increase the complexity of their AI models, right? But the problem is, let's say even if you are able to make a model, right? So now generally how do you run this model? So you know there are data centers all over the world, right? So they provide you the computational power whatever you require. They have this all GPUs and CPUs, right? So if you look at the Nvidia recent GPU from the Nvidia, so in most of the data centers you will be able to see that thousands of such GPUs will be arranged in a parallel manner, right? So if you want to train your AI model, then you just go for these data center companies, just tell them that we want to hire some of your computing power, and then you start training your AI model, right? So now that's how generally the process happens. So it's okay, once you have trained the AI model, now this has to be put in your what you can say a real-time circuit, right? A real-time processing unit, right? For example, mobile, laptop or something. So now here comes the bottleneck. So if you don't have this kind of DRAM memory that is required to store 1 trillion weight parameters or 200 billion weight parameters, then what are you going to do with such a complex AI models, right? So now that's why you may be seeing that there are different processors coming today called as the neural processing units, right? So I told you example of TPU, right? So in the previous slides, I had one slide where I showed you the CPU versus GPU versus TPU, and I told you just Google the term TPU. So this TPU is another name for the neural processing unit, and that neural processing unit is what the way we design the GPUs only for a particular gaming kind of applications, right? Now the for the same way we are using this neural processing units only for performing this machine learning kind of operation. That's it. We want to just perform multiply accumulate operation. So I will just go back to that slide, and I will just explain once a minute. Yeah, so this is the slide that I was talking about. So this TPU that you are seeing, right? So there is one more name for it called as the neural processing unit. So now what it will do, as I told you, there is a power constraint available with me. Now in the same amount of power constraint, I want to perform I want to allow the as complex AI model as possible, right? And what do you mean by complexity of AI model? Multiple number of layers, multiple number of weights of that neural networks, right? So now if in a given power constraint, if I'm able to perform a lot of multiply and accumulate operation, that means that processing unit is performing operation efficiently, right? So the same way, the reason we designed the GPU separately compared to the CPU, now we are doing the same for this neural processing unit over here. So it will perform the whatever operation that GPU is performing for this AI models, but with much less power, because this TPU will be optimized only for performing multiply add operation. So if you try to run your different LTSpice MATLAB softwares, or if you try to do some what you can say other stuff like video recording or some other stuff, just like I'm presenting a PPT to you right now, correct? So you cannot perform that operation efficiently because this TPU has been only optimized for this multiply and accumulate operations, right? And now and now we are moving over there because of this DRAM issue, right? So as I told you, this DRAM issue is persisting and it is causing a bottleneck called as a hardware bottleneck for this complex AI models. And the way we are moving ahead is we are creating our separate neural processing units. And there is one more thing that is coming up, is like this interface that I told you between the memory and this logic, right? Right now you are seeing that there is a PCB board, and through the lines, the interface, the DRAM data is fetched from the logic. So now there is a technology called as 2.5D or 3D, where you just take this DRAM, you put it on top of the logic. Of course they are still separate chips only, but what happens, this if I am able to reduce the length of this interface, right, then the amount of energy that I am wasting in fetching the data, it will reduce actually. So this is the thing that I wanted to tell it to you. So this was regarding the first part of the today's lecture, regarding how semiconductor industry is now having this hardware bottleneck for this complex AI models. and you can search this term, like you can search about the neural processing units, you can search about this what are the issues that semiconductor industry is facing for complex AI models. You will get a lot of articles. I suggest you to please read that. I just wanted to tell you this flow because what we know from the course now is just this MOSFET leakage issue, right? We have the leakage current in the MOSFET, and this increases as you reduce the technology node, as you move to advanced technology node. So I just wanted to connect the dot to you, like why such a just a small issue has caused such a huge amount of havoc, right? And the reason why that's why your fundamentals should be always solved, always clear, because if you don't study fundamentals clearly, then you will just scratch your head to understand what is actually happening, right? So every issue that you are currently facing in the semiconductor industry, everything can be traced back to the fundamentals, just like this is just a one example that I give you, right, regarding the leakage current. There are multiple short channel effects that happens when you reduce the MOSFET, that is you reduce the transistor size of the MOSFET. There are multiple short channel effects, and each of these short channel effects may cause some different problems. Just like the leakage current caused this issue, some other problem will cause some other issue. So that's the flow that I wanted to give it to you. So I will stop here for a few questions. I would like to have a good discussion with you guys. So please feel free to ask anything. Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat again? Mm-hmm. Yes, correct. For each user, no, see, this is just a one network that is there, right? So, see, there is a limited amount, like how many users it can handle at one moment. There is a limit to that, right? So, if all millions of people start using this OpenAI GPT-3 at the same time, then the server cannot handle such a huge amount of load, right? So this model is there. Now you ask me where that model has been implemented. Then there are complex, what you can say, in the data center. There are lots of thousands of GPUs are there, right? So over there, that model must have been implemented. And these companies, this OpenAI that you're talking, right? They hire that data center space, right? And it costs them a lot because the power consumption in that data center is around some 250 or 300 watts or something. So it consumes a lot of power. So now just to give you an example, the total electricity that is consumed by the world, around 1.5% of that electricity is just consumed by these total data centers, right? So now coming to your question, like if I have hundreds of user, will it create 175 billion parameters for each user? Then the answer is no, because this model has already been trained, right? These 175 billion parameters that you are seeing, these parameters are fixed now, because they must have trained this model for a long amount of time. Only then they got this accurate 175 billion parameter values, right? And the moment they have the values, their neural network is fixed now, right? Once their neural network is fixed, their weights are fixed. What does this mean? Only the input is changing now. So just to go back, just a minute. Where was the thing? Yeah, so as I told you, only this cat kind of image is changing now. This whatever you are seeing right over here, these layers and everything, this is completely fixed. And where this is implemented inside the GPUs, inside the NPUs, right? So now the answer is clear, no, because this neural network remains fixed. Only the input will change. So I don't know what is exactly happening, whether they have multiple such models or not. But if there is only one model like that, and let's say 100 users try to access this model, then 100 users would be queued up over here just to use this one model. So if 100 people are feeding 100 images of cats, right, then one image will pass on, then it will give the output, then the next image will pass on, then it will give the output, the third image will pass on, it will give the output. So it happens like that. Yeah, okay. Guys, anything, any? Yeah, go ahead. Huh? uh, a software knowledge, you want to design the hardware or you want to run the AI model? What you want to do exactly? Hardware na, no hardware. If you just want to have a hardware, then you just need to know this function. See, I just told you that, like, I'm ignoring this function, right? But you know there is something called as an activation function, right? So now your what is your job is to just implement this operation efficiently. You like, those people won't care if you know about the AI or not. Your the specifications will be given to you, like the power constant and everything. And what is your job? You have to just design these adders, multipliers in a most efficient manner possible. So if you ask me whether you want to have the knowledge of the AI just to design the hardware, then I will say no. You just want to know how these operations are going to be performed, and you just want to know the how these neural networks are arranged actually. So how many layers are there, so that you can decide how many multipliers and accumulators you want to have. So having a top level overview knowledge is always good, but if you want me to tell you, like, whether you need to have the all the knowledge of that recurrent neural networks, the general adversarial networks and everything, then you don't need to have all that knowledge. Only thing that matters is whether you implement this operation as efficient manner as possible in the hardware or not. That's it. Okay, somebody was asking something, I guess. Threshold kind of thing means, can you tell me exactly what do you mean? Uh-huh. Yeah. So I got your point. So see this, whenever this thing is off, whenever this transistor is off, there, of course, there is a threshold, right? So for example, if I'm operating from, let's say, 0 to 1 volt supply, then you are saying, like, I will keep zero point 0.5 volt as a threshold. And now if this value is between the zero point 0.5 volts and 1 volts, right, then you are saying that I will interpret this as a 1. And if this threshold is, and if this value is between 0 to 0.5 volts, then this value I will interpret as a 0. This is what you are telling, right? Yeah, exactly. So that's how we do in the digital. That's how we do in the VLSI, right? If you open any digital VLSI textbook, then this thresholding is always there. Even in case of CMOS inverter, the basic circuit CMOS inverter, you will always have this threshold. Like, above the threshold you interpret as a 1, below the threshold you interpret as a 0. But it is, see, this what you can say, there is a constant current that is being presented by this MOSFET, the leakage current, right? So it will be what you can say, it will be discharged continuously. And now coming to your point, like, regarding the threshold, so the refresh rate that I told you, right, the speed with which I have to restore this value, now it depends on that threshold also and the magnitude of this leakage current. So if I am not setting the threshold properly, that means if I'm not allowing this charge to go to zero point 0.5 volt, let's say I'm assuming that zero point 0.9 volt means, I will assume this as a 1 bit only till zero point 0.9 volts. So what does this mean? The moment this voltage drops to zero point 0.9 volt, I have to start doing the refreshing operation. So if you tell me to modify the threshold, then the problem that will happen is that the refreshing rate will start increasing, and again the refreshing will take some power, right? That refreshing operation that you are doing, that you are restoring this value, again it will consume some power, right? So whatever you told regarding the threshold, we do it like that. And this refresh rate that I told you, right, it is based on this threshold also, and how quickly this charge is actually getting leaked through this constant current source. So that is how we generally decide. Was it clear, or do you have any more doubts? Uh-huh. Means I didn't get out. Can you please explain a little bit? Yes. No, no. What do you mean by supplying leakage? What do you mean by supplying leakage current? I didn't get that term. Yes, correct. Hello, your voice is breaking. Uh, to bring, no, this leakage is causing your charge to, this leakage is the main reason that is causing your capacitor to discharge, right? And we don't want it to discharge. Now, what you are saying is, I didn't get. I mean, how you want to charge this capacitor using the leakage current? Mm, I'm not very sure exactly. So you are saying, okay, let me try to imagine what you are saying. So you are saying there is this transistor, and now I will put one more transistor over there in parallel to the capacitor, and whenever this transistor is in the off mode, right? So now what do you want? The amount of current that the capacitor is seeing, right? This leakage current. Now you are saying my that just have one more transistor over here, just turn it off, right? And the leakage current that will be going from here, it will directly go through this transistor that is attached to the word line. So no current will be consumed from this capacitor. This is what you are telling. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but the see, now you are causing one more problem. The reason why we use this one transistor DRAM, right, is because it is only consuming one transistor. Now you are increasing the transistor density, right? Now you want like just to have a one bit over here. Now you are making this as a two. You are using two transistors over here. Now, if you consider, if you do you know about the SRAM cell? It has a six transistors, right? So the reason why we go with the DRAM to implement the memory is because it can be only implemented with a single transistor and the SRAM memory. So for example, just a minute. Yeah, so I told you there is a on-chip memory, right? We implement it using the SRAM. But it has, if I want to implement the same amount of memory, I will need 6 times more space in the SRAM compared to the DRAM, right? So now, coming to your part, if I arrange a transistor in parallel with this capacitor, so it may work. So first of all, the matching this leakage current, right? Matching the leakage current of this transistor and this transistor, it is going to be little bit difficult. So any difference between this leakage current will flow through this capacitor, right? So that is one point. And the next thing is, now you are increasing the transistor amount of transistor to implement the same amount of memory. So this size, let's say you are getting a 16, let's say you are getting 16 GB memory out of this IC. Now if you put two transistors, the size will get doubled almost. So that is the problem that you don't want to face, right? Did you get the point? Okay, great. Guys, any more questions? Was it clear or it just went above everyone's head? Just give me some feedback regarding that. Did you understand this last figure? I just want you to understand this last part. That's it. So whatever Ramayana I told you, it was just to for this, like how this a small issue in the whatever you are going to study in this course, how it is causing a havoc. So did you get this part, or are there any more doubts? It is clear, right? Okay, great. Okay, so what we will do, we will take a short break of 10 minutes. We will start at 7:05. I have some good problems to solve from the week 2 content, and we will get back at around 7:05. So we will take a short break now. So you guys can go back and have a refreshment. Yeah, it's recording. Great. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
there is two types of RAM.
Correct.
Yeah, one will be this one will be used, which will be away from the memory side, or it will be taken from the CPU.
It is generally the whatever on-chip memory that you have, right? So I told you there are two memories. One is the off-chip memory. Like on-chip memory cannot have a lot of space, right? So I guess the on-chip memory means your cache memories and everything. So they are generally implemented using the SRAM, and your off-chip the large memory. You tell like 64 GB of RAM, 32 GB of RAM, right? So that is generally implemented using that DRAM actually. So your cache memories, you can say they are implemented using the SRAMs, the on-chip memories, and the off-chip memory, that is your DRAM and everything, they will be implemented using that what you can say the single transistor structure that I told you.
Okay, so this one will be faster than this one.
Faster than SRAM. Actually, I don't have a lot of expertise regarding the memory architecture. There may be some research happening from different research groups regarding the fast memory. Some different memories are also coming up now. So for example, some register based memories are like RAM or something are coming up, but I don't have a lot of idea how they operate and all. At least I know that they are not there in the market yet. So if you open any CPU, GPU or anything, you won't be able to find those the cutting edge research that is happening in the memory, because generally first the research happens in the academia, and once the industry finds it suitable, then they that research goes into the product. So there is a huge amount of lag that happens, maybe 2-3 years also between the academic and the industrial research. So I literally don't have any idea whether there is anything faster than SRAM or not, but I hope that clarifies. Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay, guys. So great. So we will solve. So we will start solving the problems. So this is the first question. Let me yeah. So this is the first question. Like in an intrinsic semiconductor, the free electron concentration depends on. Just a minute. Let me turn on my pen. Yeah. So now I will just write one formula. So they're asking in an intrinsic semiconductor, like the free electron concentration depends on. So first of all, we will write the formula for the free electron concentration, right? What it is: N naught is equal to P naught is equal to Ni is equal to what? I will just write Ni square over here so that it will become easier for me to write the expression NCNV into exponential of minus of Eg by Kt, right? Correct. So now we will, using this formula, we will try to answer this question, right? So can any one of you please tell me whether this expression has a dependence on temperature or not? it it will depend, right? You have a kt over here, so this is the first point, right? And in nc and nv, both of them are proportional to t to the power 3 by 2, right? So this is the second point. So it has a dependence on the temperature, right? Now is it only dependent on the effective mass of electron only? No, because there are two terms. One is the me star that will come from here, and there is a mh star that will come from here. So they are dependent on the effective masses of both electron as well as the holes, right? So these two options are not correct. Now let's move on to the fourth option: width of the forbidden energy band of the semiconductor. What does this mean? This is nothing but your Eg, right? So do I have a Eg in the expression? Yes, I have a Eg in the expression. Now does it depend on the applied bias? There is nothing in this expression that is depending on the applied bias. This effective mass and everything that you are seeing, right, it's a property of the semiconductor independent of this what you can say, the applied bias, right? So there is no term that is currently present in this equation number 1 that depends on the applied bias. So this is not the correct option. And the next option is the difference between the conduction band energy and the Fermi level. Only that is, it is telling that it is only dependent on EC minus EFI. But I can clearly see that there is nothing that is depending on EC minus EFI. It is only depending on this EG. And what is this EG? EC minus EV, right? So even this last option is not correct. So I hope this question was clear. This was a pretty easy question, came in the GATE EC 1987. Now we will move on to the next question. So what is this question asking? So again, it is related to the intrinsic carrier concentration in the gallium arsenide at temperature T is equal to 400 Kelvin, right? So they are asking us to calculate the Ni of gallium arsenide at 400 Kelvin temperature, and this table has been given to us, and these parameters that you are seeing, right, they are given at 300 Kelvin temperature, right? So first of all, we have to find Ni at 400 Kelvin, right? So I will just write the previous expressions: Nc 400 Kelvin, Nv 400 Kelvin. As I told you, they depend on the temperature, right? The Nc and Nv into exponential of minus Eg. Eg is given to me, right? So I will just write the expression as of now: Eg divided by the Kt, right? So first of all, I have to find the values of Nc and Nv at 400 Kelvin. The values of Nc and Nv for gallium arsenide are given to me in this table, right? But they are given at 300 Kelvin temperature. Now how am I going to find the values at 400 Kelvin temperature? You know, Nc or Nv, they are proportional to T to the power 3 by 2, right? If you go back to the formula, they are proportional to T to the power 3 by 2. So what does this mean? If I have Nc, let's say at 400 Kelvin, correct? And if I have Nc at 300 Kelvin, this ratio will be nothing but 400 divided by 300 times to the power 3 by 2, right? So this is what this ratio tells me, right? So now I can write this NC 400 and NV 400 in terms of 300 Kelvin, right? So now let's try to write it down. So what will happen? So NC 400 Kelvin, right, into NV 400 Kelvin will be nothing but NC at 300 Kelvin into NV at 300 Kelvin into 4 by 3 to the power 3 by 2, correct? So this is what you will be getting, right? So now just look over here. I have made a mistake over here. This NC is proportional to 3 to the power proportional to T to the power 3 by 2. Even NV is proportional to T to the power 3 by 2. So when I'm multiplying NC with NV, this 2 should not be appearing over here, right? Because x to the power 3 by 2 into x to the power 3 by 2, right? It will just become x to the power 3. So this 2 should not be present over here, right? So now let's try to find out this value. So let's substitute this actually. So if I just substitute these values, what is the NC at 300? 4.7 into 10 to the power 17. What is NV at 300? 7 into 10 to the power 18, right? Into 4 by 3 to the power 3, correct? So if I just try to calculate this value, then this will, I guess it will come out to be around some 7.798 into 10 to the power 36. This NC and NV. NC, NV at 400 Kelvin, right? So just remember this value, we will use it. And where are we going to use it? So let me write it as equation number 1. Let me write it as equation number 2. So we will substitute equation number 2 in equation number 1, okay? So let me write it from 2 and 1, correct? So I'm going to substitute that value. So Ni square at 400 Kelvin, what was that value? 7.798 into 10 to the power 36, right, into exponential of minus Eg. Eg is given as 1.42 eV to me, right? So 1.42 into 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19, right, divided by kT. So K is what? 1.38 into 10 to the power 23 into temperature has been given to me as 400 Kelvin, right? So this is 400 Kelvin. So if you calculate this value, right, so then your Ni 400K, right, Ni at 400 Kelvin, intrinsic carrier concentration, this value will come out to be around 3.22 into 10 to the power 9 cm to the power minus 3, right? So this is what they had asked me, correct? There was one more subpart for this question. Like they asked us to calculate at T is equal to 250 Kelvin also. So that will be left as a homework. I will just write answer. You just have to follow the same procedure, right? Just like I have found out for 400 Kelvin, you have to do the same to calculate it at 250 Kelvin, right? So I will just write the answer over here and we will check whether that answer makes sense or not, correct? So then at 250 Kelvin will come out to be around 6.9 into 10 to the power 3 centimeter to the power minus 3, right? So now I will just ask you guys one question. Like you are seeing two values over here, right? The intrinsic carrier concentration at 400 Kelvin and intrinsic carrier concentration at 250 Kelvin. Now can you guys tell me whether the intrinsic carrier concentration at 400 Kelvin should be higher than 250 Kelvin or lower than 250 Kelvin? It should be higher, right? And this is what we are getting, right? This is 10 to the power 9 and this is 10 to the power 3. It is higher, it is 6 orders of magnitude higher, right? So this answer makes sense a little bit. So this calculation will be left as a homework. Now one more thing that they asked is to calculate the ratio of Ni at 400 Kelvin and at between the 400 Kelvin and 250 Kelvin. So if I just divide these two values, right? So Ni at 400 Kelvin divided by Ni at 250 Kelvin, right? So if you just divide these two values, then this answer will come out to be around some 4.66 into 10 to the power 5, right? So I hope this makes sense, right? So it was an easy numerical. Now we will move on to the next numerical. This is a little bit interesting. So what they have given to us, just a minute, let me hide this thing. Yeah. So what they have given to us, it is there is a diagram that has been given to us. On the y-axis, it's a intrinsic carrier density, and on the x-axis, it's a 1000 by temperature, right? Inverse of temperature, right? And now they are asking us, like there are three elements, and corresponding to each, we have one line over here, and these elements are named A, B, and C, right? So now they are giving us three semiconductor material and they are telling us, hey, we just have three semiconductor materials, but we don't know which material corresponds to what, right? So they are asking us to do the match the following thing that we used to do in the school, right? So now, first of all, we have to see how to interpret this graph first, right? So it is nothing but Ni versus 1 upon T graph, right? So let me write the equation of the Ni, right? Again, it's the same equation that I am writing, NCNV exponential of what? Minus Eg by Kt, right? So now what I'm going to do, I will just take the log on both the sides over here. 2 times ln of Ni, right, is equal to what? You can say ln of NCNV minus Eg by Kt, right? And now since this graph is plotted with respect to 1000 by T, what I will do, I will make one adjustment. I will multiply this second term by 1000 and divide it by 1000, right? And why am I doing that? Because I will get 1000 by T over here, right? So now what this graph became like, it became like ln of Ni, right? And it became like 1000 by T. So now it will look something like y is equal to C minus mx, right? So this graph will look something like this. Now what we have to do, we have to just identify the slope, the m, because in all these three lines, what you can see, these lines have different slopes, right? So if I'm able to see that this slope that you are seeing, Eg upon 1000 times k, right? So this slope, if I'm able to identify properly, then my job will be done. Like corresponding to each element, Si, germanium and gallium arsenide, you know, like this slope will be different, because this slope I can write it as negative of Eg divided by what? 1000 times k, correct? The k is constant and this is my value of the slope, right? So now this slope just reduced down to the Egs, right? So now we know what is the Eg of Si. It's around not 0, sorry, it's around 1.12 ev, correct? For germanium it's around 0.68 ev, correct? And for gallium arsenide it's around 1.42 ev, I guess, right? So now what does this tell me? This equation tells me that the semiconductor compound which has a higher band gap, right, it will have a more slope of this curve, right? So which of this following has more band gap? You can clearly see it is a gallium arsenide, right? So a sharper line. So what do I mean by sharper line? So let's say this is one line, this is one line, this is one line, right? So this line has a more slope compared to this line. So now we will see which line among the ABC has the highest slope, right? So this A is having this slope, the B is falling with this rate, and C is falling with a higher rate, right? So this C line that you are seeing over here, it is having a highest slope. And as I told you, this slope is nothing but proportional to Eg. So my C is nothing but actually a gallium arsenide. It is gallium arsenide. If I look at A, it is falling with a lowest amount of slope compared to this B and C, right? So that means its Eg must have been very lower, correct? And which of the following elements has the lowest Eg? It is a germanium, right? So your A is nothing but a germanium and the remaining one is your silicon, right? So hope this was an interesting question, but it was also an easy question. So hope this question was clear. If you guys have any doubts, then please feel free to poke me. I will move on to the next question. Now, yeah, so there is this concept called as the intrinsic Fermi position, right? So I don't know, can you guys please tell me whether sir covered this concept or not? The concept of intrinsic Fermi position. Hello? It was not there. Okay, no issues. So what does this intrinsic Fermi position means? It means that you know, intrinsic semiconductor, right? The number of holes and electrons are all equal to Ni, right? So what we have done over here, so we want to find the value of this EFI actually. So the Fermi level in the intrinsic semiconductor is called as nothing but the intrinsic Fermi level, right? So as you know, in the intrinsic semiconductor, the concentration of electrons and holes are equal, right? So this is what the formula of the concentration of electrons, and this is the concentration of the holes. So the moment I equate this formula, I will get an equation, and I will get an equation. When I take the log on that equation, I will get for something like this, right? And what I am doing now, I just want to see whether this intrinsic Fermi level is actually falling exactly in the mid band of the conduction band and the valence band, right? So you have just a minute, I will draw over here. Yeah, so you have EC, right? You have EV over here, right? And there will be one level where I can tell you that it will be nothing but EC plus EV by 2, correct? And now there is one more level that will be like Fermi level, EFI. I want to see whether this Fermi level and this EC plus EV by 2, whether they overlap exactly or not. So from this derivation, what I am proving over here, this has been taken from the Donald Niemann, that they are indeed separable, they are not overlapping exactly, and they will overlap only in one condition, when this term inside the log, right, when it becomes 1, that is the effective mass of the, what you can say, the hole, and the effective mass of the electron, when they become equal in the semiconductor, only in that case this intrinsic Fermi level will be exactly at the mid band over here. That is the Eg by 2 level, right? Eg by 2, correct? But in most of the cases it is not the case. And in the next numerical, why I have taken this concept, because there were questions asked in the GATE exam based on this, and we will see how small this gap is actually, right? So if you follow up this derivation, and the moment you put it EC plus EV by 2 as a E mid gap, you will have an expression of the difference in the energy levels of the intrinsic Fermi level and the mid gap level. And just remember this formula, it is nothing but 3 by 4 kT ln of mp star upon mn star, right? And now there was one more way we can find the carrier concentration, right? So now you must be seeing this formula, right? This is what sir must have told you, right? But there is one more formula based on this intrinsic Fermi level concept that I explained to you just one slide back, right? So based on this formula also we can calculate the value of n naught actually. So now how we can do that? So we can do some algebraic manipulation over here, right? I am adding plus EFI and I am subtracting the EFI, correct? So here subtracting the EFI, and here I am adding the EFI. The minus and minus become plus over here, right? So the moment you do this type of algebraic manipulation and you take the exponential out, this term that you are seeing over here, right? This term, we have seen this, right? Just a slide back, we have seen that this NC into exponential of EC minus EFI by KT is nothing but your Ni, right? And again this term appeared over here, so this term can be just replaced with the Ni, right? And you can write the concentration of free electrons in terms of the intrinsic carrier concentration. And similarly you can do for the, just a minute, something happened with the pointer, yeah. And similarly you can do for the whole concentration also. So the N naught is equal to nothing but Ni times exponential of EF minus EFI by KT. So what do I mean by EF minus EFI by KT? You have EC, you have EV, you will have a Fermi level, you will have an intrinsic Fermi level over here. If my semiconductor is n-type doped, then my Fermi level will be somewhere here, right? So this difference EF minus EFI, this is what this EF minus EFI corresponds to actually. And this is how you can find the concentration of free electrons, right? So we will use these formulas in the next numericals, so please remember them. Now here comes a problem. So what they are asking, determine the position of the intrinsic Fermi level at T is equal to 300 Kelvin with respect to the center of the band gap. So I just told you, right, the center of the band gap. So you have EC, you have EV, right? You have EFI over here, and you will have EG by 2 level over here. So they want us to find this difference, right? So now I just told you this formula, we just derived it, right? So your EFI minus E mid gap, it comes out to be what? 3 by 4 kT times ln of effective mass of holes divided by effective mass of electrons, correct? So now this is what the formula is. So now we want to find the ratio MP's, what happened to the pointer, just a minute. Yeah, so we want to find this ratio MP star upon Mn star, right? And for the same, like the temperature has been given to me as 300 Kelvin, and this table is also for 300 Kelvin. So we have been given some values. Let's see for the gallium arsenide, right? So we will solve this for the first gallium arsenide, and then we will solve it for germanium. So for gallium arsenide, that is written over here. So Mn star upon M naught is 0.667. So Mn star upon M naught is what? 0.067, and MP star upon M naught is 0.48, right? MP star upon M naught is 0.48. So if I just divide these two values, right? If I just divide these two things, then MP star upon Mn star will come out to be what? 0.48 divided by 0.067, and this value, if you calculate it, it will come out to be 7.164, right? So just by looking at this value, you can clearly see how heavy the hole is actually compared to the electron in case of the gallium arsenide crystal, right? Your electron will be able to move with very good amount of ease, because just see this ratio 0.067 with respect to the mass of free electrons, right? And if you look at the holes, then you can clearly see, if you just take the ratio of effective mass of holes with electrons, you will get that ratio at 7.164, correct? So that's the one way to interpret it. Now let's solve this numerical, right? We have everything we wanted. This ratio came out to be around 7.164 and we know everything that we want. So EFI minus E mid gap, right? So it will be coming out to be 3 by 4. KT will be nothing but 0.0259, right? And my long will be nothing but 7.164, correct? So if you put this value, right, then this difference will come out to be around EFI minus E mid. It will come out to be around 38.24 milli electron volt. Very small value, right? And it should be small because generally we said ki generally they are very close with respect to each other, the mid gap and the intrinsic Fermi level. And similarly they have asked us to calculate for the germanium also. So I won't be solving this again. I will just write the end results for germanium, right? So this value will come out to be around minus 7.7 milli electron volt, correct? And if you want to know the reason for this, then I will explain the reason. Just look at the values over here. For germanium, 0.55, correct, and 0.37. Like their ratios are not significantly different. Whereas in case of the gallium arsenide, I had the one term as 0.067 and 0.48, almost 10 times bigger, right? So that's why I got a, what you can say, a large amount of difference between EFI and E mid compared to the germanium, where the difference is volts, right? So I hope the question was clear. Again, a easy question. If you guys have any doubt, please feel free to poke me. Now we will move on to the next question. So what is this question telling us? Just a minute. Yeah. So it is telling us that there is a silicon at T is equal to 300 Kelvin and it is doped with the arsenic atoms, right? So N-type semiconductor, and such that the concentration of electrons is 7 into 10 to the power 15 cm to the power minus 3. Now what they are asking, the position of Fermi level with respect to EC and DFI. So just to make the things simple, I will just draw the diagram very quickly again. So you have a EFI over here, right? Since it's a N-type doped semiconductor, my Fermi level will be somewhere here, right? This is my EF. What they're asking me, the position of Fermi level with respect to EC and DF. So they want two terms. EC minus EF, first is the term they want, and the second term is EF minus EFI. So these are the two terms that we want to find, EC minus EF and EF minus EFI, right? So now like there are two formulas that we have seen, right? The electron concentration can be written in two ways, in terms of EC minus EF also and in terms of EF minus EFI also. So we will use both these formulas to solve this question. So let's begin with the first formula. What is the formula? And not is nothing but NC times exponential of minus of EC minus EF by KT, right? And what they want us to find this EC minus EF term, right? Now this is a little bit opposite question. Everywhere, just a minute, again something happened to the pointer. Yeah, everywhere we were asked to calculate the concentration of electron, but this is the first question where we will see they are asking us to calculate the difference in energy levels and the concentration has been given to us, right? So now again the value of NC has been given to me, right? So let me write this term, let me take the logarithm on both the sides. So what I will do, ln of N naught by NC. So it's a simple thing, I am taking it over here in the denominator and I will be taking ln on both the sides, so that this CC minus CF will come out of the exponential, right? So ln of N naught minus NC, it will become what? Minus of EC minus EF by KT, right? So I can write it like EC minus EF, correct, is nothing but minus KT times ln of N naught by NC, right? So this is a formula that we got for EC minus EF. So now nothing is there, we just have to substitute the values in this formula, correct, in this formula. So I am substituting the values now. So it will be nothing but minus of 0.0259, right, log of N naught has been given to me in the question, 7 into 10 to the power 15, and value of NC has also been given to me, 2.8 into 10 to the power 19, right? This term is going to be lesser than 1, So there is going to be a negative sign, right? And this negative sign and this negative sign will become a positive sign over here, right? So if we calculate this value, then this answer will come out to be around, just a minute, have I made any mistake over here? No, I don't think there is any mistake. So this answer will come out to be around 0.0, 0. Not 0.0, 0.207 electron volts. Electron volts, okay? And let's do the sanity check whether this is making sense or not. This is what EC minus EF, right? This is EC minus EF, and EC minus EF quantity should always be positive, correct? Because the Fermi level generally lies below the conduction band, right? Correct. So now let me see. So this 0.27 is the positive term, and so we got the positive term. So this sanity check is confirmed now. Now we will use the second formula. What is the second formula? So the second formula tells us that N naught can be also expressed as Ni into exponential of EF minus EFI by KT. Correct. So again I will take the log, I will divide this over here, and again we will do the same exercise. So after doing the same exercise, you will find that the EF minus EFI level, its formula will come out to be KT times log of N naught by Ni, right? So again everything has been given to me, right? So let's calculate each and every value. 0.0259 into log of N naught has been given to me in the question. It was 7 into 10 to the power 15, 7 into 10 to the power 15, and Ni we know for silicon, right? 1.5 into 10 to the power 10, correct? So if you substitute this everything, then this difference will come out to be around 0. Not 0.0, 0.326 electron volt. Now let's check whether this makes sense or not, right? So see, I already know it is a n-type doped semiconductor, right? So here is my EFI, and since it's a n-type doped semiconductor, my Fermi level will be lying in the top half, right? So EF minus EFI level should come positive, right? And this is what we got. This is a positive value, right? So this makes sense. So again, a good question, and if you guys have any doubt, please feel free to poke me. So this question I will leave as a homework to you. It is based on the same concept. What is it? It is asking, compared to the undoped silicon, the Fermi level of doped silicon. In short, they are asking this difference, EF minus EFI, right? And here the silicon is doped with the boron, right? Boron is what? It's an acceptor, correct? So we have a p-type semiconductor now, correct? And you have to do the same exercise now, right? This N naught is equal to Ni. You have to write the formula for what? P naught is equal to Ni times exponential of the same EFI minus EF by KT, right? Again, you use this equation and find out this value of EFI minus EF. You will get an answer, right? So this is left as a homework for you. I will just write an answer for you. This EFI minus EF level, right, that you are seeing, it will come out to be around 0.427 electron volts. Okay, and now you can match it easily with the options that are given in the question now. So I hope the question is clear. Now we will move on to the next concept of ionized donor and acceptor concentration. So what sir must have told you in the lectures is that, see, there is a, we are adding the impurities, right? Either they will be in the form of the donor, which makes us the n-type semiconductor, or they will be in the form of the acceptors, which helps us in making the p-type semiconductor, right? So they create certain energy levels if we are adding the donors, right? So this energy level just gets formed below the conduction band. Why? Because the ionization energy of these donors is very less, right? The room temperature is sufficient to pull out most of the electrons from these donors into the conduction band, right? So this is what sir must have told you, and similarly is there for the acceptor atoms, right? So now there is a thing like this happens at the room temperature, but what happens if I decrease my temperature, right? You know there are cryogenic circuits, right? Nitrogen cooled circuits and everything, right? So what happens over there if I am adding the donor and acceptor? How much percentage of the donors or acceptors that I am adding, they will get ionized, right? So this is a formula that sir must have told you. Like this formula tells you how much percentage of donors are actually getting ionized and how much percentage of acceptors over here are getting ionized, right? And he must have told you that this factor of 2 is coming because of the spin, and this factor of 4 is coming because of two things, right? So let me write it quickly, just a minute. Pen, yeah. So this factor of 4 is coming just a minute, yeah. So this factor of 4 is coming because of two things. One is the spin, and another one is because of the lighter hole and one is the heavier hole, right? So 2 into 2 it comes out to be 4, right? So this is just a vague explanation that must have been given, and now based on this concept we will try to solve some numericals, right? So now let's move on to the numerical number 7. So what has been given to us, consider a silicon with a phosphorus impurity concentration of Nd is equal to 10 to the power 15, right? Now determine the percent of ionized phosphorus atoms at T is equal to 100, 200, 300 and 400 Kelvin. Again I will do the same thing. I will solve this question for this T is equal to 100 Kelvin, and for this 200, 300, 400 Kelvin you just have to follow the same procedure. And what they have given over here, assume the ionization energy of the donor atoms is around 45 milli electron volt. What do I mean by that? You have EC over here and you have the ED, the donor levels, right? So this EC minus ED, this gap they have given as 45 milli electron volt, right? So now let's try to solve this question. So how should I solve this question? We have one formula, right? Nd plus by Nd is what? 1 upon 1 plus 2 times exponential of, right, EF minus ED divided by KT, right? Now let's me see whether I have the value of EF minus ED or not. I know EC minus ED. See, EC minus ED is known to me, but EC is not present in this equation, right? So somehow I need to do the algebraic manipulation and bring the EC over here, right? So let's do that manipulation. EF minus ED, what I am going to do, I am going to add and subtract EC in this equation. Minus EC plus EC, right? What I want, EC minus ED. So this term and this term, EC minus ED, I am gonna combine, and this EF minus EC, right? These two terms I am gonna combine. So what it will become like? EC minus ED, correct? And if I take minus out, then it will become like EC minus EF, correct? And if I just divide KT on both the sides, correct, then it will become like EF minus ED by KT, correct? So this is the equation that I have now. Now I will take exponential on equation number 2. So exponential on equation number 2. So what I will be left with, exponential of this EF minus ED by KT, it will be nothing but exponential of EC minus ED by KT into exponential of, correct, minus of EC minus EF, right, by KT. Sorry, I don't have a space over here. So now you must have heard this term, right? Exponential of EC minus EF by KT, right? So we have seen this term in previously. So what is this term? Let me just go back, and yeah. So this is what I was talking about, exponential of EC minus EF by KT. So it is nothing but your ND by NC value actually, correct? So now let me go back in the numerical and let me substitute this. This will be nothing but your actually ND by NC, ND by NC, correct? So now what I am going to do, this term that you are seeing over here, it is appearing in the equation number 1. So I will substitute this. How? ND by NC into exponential of EC minus ED by KT. So this term in the equation number 1, it will be replaced by this equation, KT. I will just highlight this equation so that it will be helpful, correct? So now I will be substituting this in this equation number 1. So now let's try to do that, right? So ND plus by ND, right? ND plus by ND, it will be coming out to be around 1 upon 1 plus 2 is there. We got this ND by NC factor over here, and into exponential of, it become like EC minus ED by KT, right? Now I know this term, right? I know this, it is 45 milli electron volt. This is what has been given to me. So now let's check whether we have all the values or not. See, there is a term called as a NC over here, and you know NC terms varies as a t to the power 3 by 2, right? Proportional to t to the power 3 by 2. What has been given in the question, I want to find at t is equal to 100 Kelvin, right? But in this table, if you see, for the silicon, the values have been given at 300 Kelvin. So there is one more unknown for me. I want to calculate NC at 100 Kelvin, right? This is not known to me. So let's try to calculate it. Just what we have done for the previous question, right? So NC at 100 Kelvin divided by NC at 300 Kelvin will be nothing but it will be proportional to 100 by 300 times 3 by 2, right? So this is what we had used, right? So now let's try to use this over here, and we will be able to find that NC of 100 Kel is equal to NC of 300 Kelvin into 1 by 3 to the power 3 by 2, right? So this is what we will be using. And what is this NC of 300K value? It must be given to us in the question, because this whole table was given for 300 Kelvin. So the NC value is 2.8 into 10 to the power 19, right? 2.8 into 10 to the power 19 into 1 by 3 to the power 3 by 2, right? So now let's try to substitute everything back in the equation. And before that, I just forgot to calculate this value. This NC of 100K, this value will come out to be around some 5.389 into 10 to the power 18. This is the value that we are gonna get. So let's try to substitute everything in this equation. ND plus by ND, right? It will come out to be 1 divided by 1 plus 2 times ND by NC. I know the value of ND because it has been given to me in the question, right? Let's check. ND is 10 to the power 15, correct? So 2 into 10 to the power 15 divided by the NC value that I calculated, right? 5.389 into 10 to the power 18, right? Into exponential of, right? So what is there? 0.045 electron volts is there, but I have to convert it into, I have to multiply it with 1.6 into 10 to the power 19, right? To convert the units from electron volts. And what is the value of KT? 1.38 into 10 to the power minus 23 into temperature has been given as 100 Kelvin, right? So now if you solve this big value, now it will come out to be around 0.9359. So this ratio will come out to be around 93.59%. So what does this mean? 93.6% of the donors, right, that I had actually given, whatever donors I had given to make the N-type semiconductor, almost 93.6% of the donors are ionized at 100 Kelvin temperature. So this is what this question is telling us, and this is a homework for you guys. Like, you just have to follow the similar procedure. Exactly, you have to find the values of NC at 200, 300 and 400 Kelvin temperature, correct? So this will be left as a homework, and you guys can calculate those values. So these values, all these values that you are seeing, right, if you want the correct answer, then all of them should be greater than around 99.2%, all of them. And as the temperature increases, this value should approach 100 almost, right? So this is a homework for you, and I hope the question was clear. Please feel free to probe me if you guys have any doubts. Okay, I will keep on moving with the next question. And now this is a little bit tricky question, in the sense that it is a heavily, what you can say, this question cannot be solved just with a simple calculator. So what the question is asking: determine the temperature at which 90% of the acceptor atoms are ionized. Now this is a little bit weird question, because in the previous question we have seen that it was asking us just to calculate the percentage of percent of ionized phosphorus, and the temperature was given. Now this is reversing the question, right? It is telling me that I am giving you the percentage. Now you tell me how much how much is the temperature now. So now we will use the formula, right? But this is for the acceptor over here, right? We have to use a different formula. So what is it? 1 upon 1 plus 4 times exponential of, correct, EA minus EF by KT. EA minus EF by KT, correct? Now again I have to do the same algebraic manipulation, because this ionization energy, right, it is nothing but your EA minus EV, right? And I don't have a EV term over here, right? So again you have to do the same stuff, EA minus EF plus EV minus EV. Then you have to combine the EV minus EF term, and then you have to combine EA minus EV term, right? And once you do that, then you can write the formula. I will just write the final results. You can do the algebraic manipulation at home also. So now this will become something like 1 upon 1 plus 4 times Na by Nv, correct? Somebody wants to join. Okay, yeah, 1 plus 4 into Na by Nv into exponential of Ea minus Ev by Kt, correct? Now now I know this Ca minus Cv, right? So now I can operate with this equation, but there is only one issue, that they are asking us the temperature, and Nv is dependent on the temperature, right? So now how the Nv is dependent on temperature, again the same thing. You can calculate that Nv at particular temperature T naught is nothing but Nv at temperature 300 Kelvin, right, into T naught by 300 to the power 3 by 2. We have seen this multiple times, right? So this should not cause any issue now. So now if you substitute this, Nv at 300 Kelvin I know, right? Because in the silicon, Nv at 300 is 1.04 into 10 to the power 19. So 1.04, oh, just a minute, some random stuff started to happen. Okay. Yeah. So if I try to write it, then it will be what? 1.04 into 10 to the power 19 into T naught by 300 to the power 3 by 2. Correct? So we have to substitute this equation. This equation has to be substituted in over here because the T naught is unknown to me, right? And what is the value of Na minus upon Na? They have given me that I want a 90% ionization, right? So this value will come out to be 0.9, correct? So now let's, we have everything now, let's substitute all these values. So now this 0.9 will be coming out to be what? 1 upon 1 plus 4 into Na has been given to me, right? Na has been given as 10 to the power 16 into 10 to the power 16, right? Divided by Nv we have just found out, right? This expression for Nv. So this is my Nv, right? So what it will be? 1.04 into 10 to the power 19, correct? Just a minute, yeah. And we have T naught by 300 to the power 3 by 2. So I will take it in the numerator. T naught by 300 to the power minus 3 by 2 in the numerator, right? And now we have one more thing, big exponential, right? Exponential of what we have, the ionization energy was given at 0.045 because 45 millielectron volt. I have to convert it from electron volt to normal units. This is minus 19, okay? And divided by, we have kT, 1.38 into 10 to the power minus 23 into T, right? So we have two T's. This is T naught at one place and there is another T naught at another place, right? So now what I am going to do, this denominator will go on the LHS, right? This 0.9 will come back on this side on the RHS, right? And we will try to solve it now. So the moment you do this, right? So what you are gonna get is, I will just solve few values over here because it is becoming too complicated. So 19.98 times T naught to the power minus 3 by 2, correct? Into exponential of, if you solve this value, right, all this stuff, just keep the T naught as T naught, it will come out to be around some 12,000 divided by 23 times T naught, correct? Now this will become like 1 upon 9, correct? So what is the equation that will be left with now? T naught to the power minus 3 by 2 exponential of 12,000 by 23 T naught, correct? This will be coming out to be around some equal to 5.56 times 10 to the power minus 3. Now this is not a normal equation to solve, right? You have to apply some numerical methods if you want to solve this equation. You can use some calculative methods like Newton-Raphson or something. I will just write over here. Like you can try to solve it using Newton-Raphson, and if the scientific calculator is allowed, right, then there is a way where you can solve such a complicated equations, right, in the calci. So if you use that calculator method or if you use the Newton-Raphson method, then the value of this T naught will come out to be around 193 Kelvin. For simple exams, this numerical won't be asked, but if there is a lengthy paper or something where subjective paper, then you have to use your calculator or Newton-Raphson method for solving this problem, right? So I hope this question was clear. Now we will go on with the last numerical for today, I guess, right? So the compensated semiconductor concept must have been taught to you, right? So what was this concept? It was nothing but we have donors, we also have the acceptors with us, right? So now in a semiconductor where I am adding donors as well as I am adding the acceptors, and if their concentrations are almost of the same magnitude, it becomes difficult for me to judge whether the semiconductor is actually N type or P type and what is the concentration of free electrons and holes, right? So to calculate the value of free concentration of the electrons and holes, what we did, we applied the charge neutrality equation, right? And we assumed a perfect ionization. the reason why I am replacing Nd plus with Nd and Na minus with Na is because I am assuming that the perfect ionization, complete ionization is there, and from there once we formed a quadratic equation, and once you solve the roots of this quadratic equation, you will get the value of the free concentration, the concentration of free electrons and holes in a compensated semiconductor, and its equation came out to be something like this, right? So this is the concept that we wanted to know, and this will be a last numerical for today, right? So now determine the thermal equilibrium electron and hole concentrations in silicon at T is equal to 300 Kelvin for a given doping concentrations, right? So in the first case, Nd was given as 10 to the power 16 and Na is given as 0, and in the second case, Nd is given as 5 into 10 to the power 15 and Na is given as 2 into 10 to the power 15, right? So let's start with the case number A. Nd is equal to 10 to the power 16 and Na is 10 to Na is 0, right? So can any one of you please tell me whether the case number A, whether this is the case of compensated semiconductor or not?
No, it's not.
No, it's not, right? Exactly, correct. Because Na is 0 over here, right? So not a compensated semiconductor. Not a compensated semiconductor. Correct. So now if the semiconductor is not compensated and I am assuming that Nd minus is equal to Nd, right, is equal to N naught, then I don't have to do anything. I directly got the free electron concentration, right? It is nothing but 10 to the power 16, right? And since the semiconductor is in the equilibrium, I can apply the law of mass action, which tells me that N naught times P naught is nothing but Ni square, right? So since I got the value of N naught from here, I will calculate the value of P naught by substituting the value of N naught as 10 to the power 16 in this equation, right? And Ni we know, right? Ni has been given to us in the question. So now value of P naught will come out to be what? 1.5 into 10 to the power 10 square divided by the value of N naught that I have. What is the value of N naught that I got? 10 to the power 16, right? So if you calculate this value, then the value of P naught will come out to be 2.25 into 10 to the power 4 cm to the power minus 3, correct? So these are the value of free electron and hole concentration for the case number 1. I'm just highlighting them over here, right? So now let's move on to the case number B, right? So what was the case number B? So case number B, Nd was around 5 into 10 to the power 15, right? And what was the Na value that was given to me? It was around 2 into 10 to the power 15, correct? See, their magnitudes are pretty close with each other, so I have to use that formula for the compensated semiconductors, right, to actually know how much is the concentration. So now let's use that formula. So that formula told us that N naught is nothing but Nd minus Na by 2, correct, plus root of Nd minus Na by 2 the whole square plus Ni square, right? Now let me check the values of these two things. This is the first and this is the second, right? So if I check the value, if I subtract the Nd with Na, right, so it will come out to be 3 into 10 to the power 15 divided by 2 the whole square, right? And if I check the value of Ni, it is 1.5 into 10 to the power 10 the whole square, right? So if I just compare these two magnitudes, then it will come out to be something 2.25 into 10 to the power 30. This is the magnitude for the first term, and the second term's magnitude is around 2.25 into 10 to the power 20, right? It is almost 10 times higher, right? So it is almost 10 to the power 10 times lower, correct? So I can easily ignore this term over here, right? So and if I just take this square term out of the square root, then this N naught will come out to be what? This N naught will come out to be just Nd minus Na, right? Because the moment I take this Nd minus Na by 2 plus Nd minus Na by 2, this 2 and 2, there will be 2 in the numerator and this will get cancelled with the denominator, right? So this is the value of the free concentration of the concentration of free electrons, and the value, this value N naught will come out to be 5 minus 2 into 10 to the power 15, like 5 and 2 over here. So it will come out to be around 3 into 10 to the power 15. So this is the concentration of free electrons, right? Again, the semiconductor is in the equilibrium. What I can do, I can apply N naught into P naught is equal to Ni square, right? And what is the value of P naught that I will get? Ni square divided by N naught, right? So what is the Ni square? 1.5 into 10 to the power 10 the whole square, right? Divided by whatever value I calculated right now, 3 into 10 to the power 15, right? So this value, if you calculate, it will come out to be around 7.5 into 10 to the power 4 cm to the power minus 3. Okay, so again, this was an easy question, not a trick anymore. So this was all the stuff that I wanted to cover from my side today. So I'm happy for any doubts if you guys have any. So please feel free to ask anything. Thank you.
Sir, why we ignored Ni square? I didn't get it.
Okay, cool. So if you look, just a minute. If you look over here, nd minus na by 2 over here, right? So nd minus na is 3 into 10 to the power 15 because nd is given as 5 into 10 to the power 15 and na is given as 2 into 10 to the power 15. You got till this point, right? So if you calculate this value, right, it is nothing but 1.5 into 10 to the power 15 the whole square. Correct? So now come back to the RHS over here, whatever I have written. So this value, this 1.5 into 10 to the power 15 square, it will come out to be 2.25 into 10 to the power 30. And this Ni square term, if you calculate, it will come out to be 2.25 into 10 to the power 20. Now, if I am trying to add 10 to the power 30 with 10 to the power 20, can you please tell me what will be this addition?
10 to the power 50?
10 to the power 50. How can you say that this is 10 to the power of 50? This is a plus sign. This is not a multiplication. I will simplify it for you. Don't worry. I will simplify it for you. So if I take 10 to the power 20 common over here, then it will become like 10 to the power 10 plus 1, right? Correct?
Yes, sir.
And this 10 to the power 10 is much greater than 1. Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I can ignore this one, right? So the moment I ignore this one for this addition, then it will become like 10 to the power 30. Correct? So the 10 to the power 30 plus 10 to the power 20 became again 10 to the power 30. Right? This is the reason why I ignored this Ni square term, because Ni square term had 10 to the power 20, whereas this Nd minus Na square term had 10 to the power 30 over here.
Yeah, now I get it.
Okay, great. Any more question, any doubts? Oh, okay. Thanks for reminding me. Just a minute. I had forgotten. I will post the link for the YouTube channel in the comment section. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay. Yeah. Great. So. Yeah, so I have posted the link for the YouTube channel in the chat section, so you can find all the videos over there, and in the description section you will be able to find the link for the Google Drive folder which will have the slides for today's lecture. Okay, great guys. Any more doubts? Anyone? Was it clear, like, or were you confused with the content that we covered today? Huh? Sorry, can you repeat? Hello, your voice is breaking. Huh? Can the donor level lie below the Fermi level? Generally, that should not happen, because the moment you bring the donor below the Fermi, right? So that means there is a huge gap between the conduction band and your donor level. So that means your ionization energy, that is whatever donors that you are trying to add, that means you have to cover that much energy just to get the electrons out of that donor. So that won't be the efficient thing. So I guess you are referring to that case where in the case of the defects, there are defects in the semiconductors, and there are additional levels that are created in the semiconductors because of that defects. So are you talking about that case? Because there the levels are pretty close to the Fermi level, or pretty close to the mid gap level of the semiconductor. Are you talking about that case? Huh? Okay. No, generally the donor levels won't be so far from the EC and what you can say EV. They must be very pretty close, or else what is the point of adding the donor, right? If they can't even give their electrons, right? You are just distorting the lattice. You are not even taking electrons out of the donors, right? Okay, so yeah, so if it is that close, then they must have given it for the numerical purpose only, or else if they wanted it to make like a real case scenario, then they must have mentioned that this level that you are telling about, right, which is near below the EF level, this must be some kind of defect that occurs in the semiconductor. So to just to get you the image, like if there is a defect in the semiconductor, then how badly it is affecting the energy band gap, energy band diagram, or how much extra concentration of electrons I'm getting. I guess only for that purpose they may have given you that numerical, I guess. Yeah, correct. Great. Yeah. Assignment solution, you need to actually post it in that forum is there, right? So there are two kinds of TS. So there are two other people with me who are conducting the live problem solving sessions. So we are PMRF TS. We are not the regular TS for the NPTL. So there are few regular TS of the NPTL also. So generally, what happens if you ask them in the forum for the assignment solution, then they may give you the solutions, or else sometimes what happens, they may not give you the solution. They will ask you to where are you stuck in the question, and from there on they will help you with the solution. So I guess the best way is to just answer the doubt on the forum regarding the solution for the assignments, and they will reply to you. Yes. Okay. Guys, any more doubts? We are already above the 8 p.m. If not, then we will close the session. Last chance. Any more questions? Any doubts? Okay, you're welcome, Aradhya. Okay, it looks like nobody has any doubts. So we will close the session now. Thank you guys for attending for 2 hours, and have a great evening ahead. Good night. Bye bye.